From Wakefield, it's the Nolan Show, inviting to join Nolan and his guest this week, Ron Altbach, to the show. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here's Nolan.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the show. My wonderful, amazing guest this week. Not only is he an academic when it comes to conveying stories while tickling the ivories, but his work has been at the forefront of popular music for the last 50 years. When he's not dancing the moonlight with old friends, my guest has collaborated, performed, and worked with groups and musicians such as King Harvest, which he founded, Celebration, and the Beach Boys. I am both proud and honored to have a member of the class of 2022 Niagara Falls Music Hall of Fame, Ron the Professor Altbach. Ron, how are you this week?
I'm well. Yeah, I forgot about some of that stuff. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I've had a lot of fun.
Sure, you've had a lot of fun, some could say.
I've had a lot of fun.
Uh, Singing is you've been in the music industry for a while, has had a big effect on the pandemic in the last few years of craziness and all that wildness. So for you, 3 years later, what's life been for you looking back at it?
Well, I haven't played in a band for a long time. Last time I played music with friends was in 2012. We did a King Harvest reunion, which was a lot of fun. And then, unfortunately, as we started to dream about possibly doing shows, that our friend Doc Robinson, the lead singer, died, and so that kind of dashed our fantasies.
Sure.
And I've been since the mid '80s, pretty much annually giving piano recitals, classical music. Keeps my fingers moving and my brain sharp, as much as an old brain can be. and unfortunately, during the time of COVID, it was impossible to gather big groups of people because nobody wanted to sit next to each other. So we'll see. It's hard to believe that it went. Now it seems like it went quickly. While it was going by, it seemed slow. But Eddie Talea, Rod Novak, and I from King Harvest stay in very close touch. So that's always kind of heartening. Sure. And then Mike Love and I and Al Jardine and I stay pretty much in touch too. And Al's son Matt, who's a wonderful singer and just a great kid. He's probably 60 years old now. But anyway, so I haven't kept my finger in it, but I've kept my mind in it and my heart in it,
Well, as long as you can keep that perspective, that's what matters the most. During the last few years, this has given time to people to sort of reflect upon not just themselves, but stuff around them. What's one thing Ron Altbach learned about himself during the last 3 years that he didn't know prior?
Well, that's a good question. I think that well, this may sound strange, but I think that I learned to appreciate how really lucky I have been. There's one view that says that I've been unlucky. I mean, Dancing in the Moonlight was a huge hit, and we weren't able to become rock stars. So in a way, that's unlucky. Having said that, it's amazing how I think we're at several 100 million streams of our version of Dancing in the Moonlight. Forget about Top Loader and others. And but so something was right about that recording.
Sure.
But I feel like being part of recording that song, studying in Paris with arguably the most influential teacher in the history of Western music, Nadia Boulanger, being able to be near and learn from Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. We all in King Harvest anyway. We all did TM, and obviously Mike Love and Al Jardine are meditators, and so the Beach Boys was kind of partial meditation.
Yeah.
And I've gone on and on. I'm just being part of the Beach Boys, just thinking about how I wasn't a very big part, but I played a little role. I mean, we did do wrote a few tunes and had some fun, and being close with Mike and doing Celebration. I mean, those are kind of close to the pinnacles of various pieces of culture. Not that I was a big part of it, but I was in there though.
Sure.
I saw the mountain. Let's put it that way.
Yes, exactly. I sort of want to talk and start this conversation as far back as I can, and we want to. You're growing up in New York, and obviously you're big into music, and like any other kid playing sports and whatnot. But at an early age, besides playing music, how much thought or where on the spectrum was the possibility of your skills being put towards a professional aspect?
Not very high, because I went because my dad was a doctor. I always assumed I'd be a doctor.
Sure.
I started playing music professionally when I was 13 with a big band, like a Glenn Miller type band,
Sure.
local band. It was a fantastic band leader in my little town, and we played, weddings and 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 the like. And so I was working with grown-ups. I was 13 and they were not. They were, but it was, I was as good as they were. I mean, I was a
Sure.
pretty good musician, and then we had this really good band in high school, a good rock and roll band, and in fact, that's how all the rest of my rock and roll career happened, because the high school band was invited to come down to Cornell University to play for a spring weekend. One of the guys in a fraternity was from my town. And he liked our band. He invited us down, and we're from a town of a couple thousand people, very conservative, early 60s. When you think of 60s, you think of long hair and Jimi Hendrix. No,
Sure.
no. Early 60s was like 50s.
Yeah.
And then we come down to Cornell, and here there's these, kind of wild, partially naked girls and pouring beer on top of each other. I mean, I never applied to another college. I went to Cornell because that's where I was going to go to school.
Sure.
And it just so happened, not that I planned it, but at Cornell there were 53 fraternities, and you could play rock and roll every night if you wanted to.
Sure.
So there was an opportunity to meet really good musicians, some people who were planning on doing it professionally and did do it professionally. Ozzy Allers played with guys from the Grateful Dead, I mean, obviously Huey Lewis
Yeah.
did okay, and Ronnie Dio wasn't at Cornell, but he was in the local. He was in the locale. He was called Ronnie Dio and the Prophets in those days, and then he became Dio. There was a lot of professionalism in the pop music scene there.
Sure.
So, but I didn't think I was going to do it professionally. I eventually thought I might play classical music professionally, but then that all changed when my friends came over to Paris to be around, and we started a band, and one thing led to another, and then we recorded Dancing in the Moonlight.
Sure. Speaking of going to Cornell and the guys that you eventually meet, Eddie, and the other guys at Cornell, then you go over to France where they follow you shortly after. I find it interesting that all the guys from King Harvest that go to Cornell, they obviously don't end up doing what they were majoring in, or what they at least started out in. For you, though, going to Cornell, maybe it was just purely because of the music scene. What was it about then the medical field, besides your father, that interested you in the sense of that maybe being your field?
Nothing. My father was a doctor. I was going to be a doctor. I mean, it was, I'm not I think many people who know me will tell you I'm not a thinker. I'm a doer. So that was the path. He was a doctor. It was an easy path.
Yeah.
It was a laudable path. It was, I mean, it's how much, what could you do that you'd be prouder of, in a sense, than saving people's lives or helping people's lives. So it just seemed normal. I did well in sciences and math and all that stuff. It seemed like, and Cornell had was relatively good reputation. I mean, it's not Harvard, it's not Yale, but it's still top 10, top 12 schools in the country. And so it just seemed like the right thing to do. But I never, my heart wasn't in it.
Sure.
And there was one fateful night up in the genetics lab where, when you're a genetics, when you study genetics, you use fruit flies to carry traits from one generation to the next. They mate fast and they reproduce fast. And so you have to count them. You have to, after they are born, you have to separate the boys from the girls because they start screwing pretty fast. So you have to catch them, and then you anesthetize them, and then you separate them. So I'm up in the lab, and it was after one of my college band gigs, probably 2 a.m, and I probably drank a little bit, and who knows what else I had. And I just looked down at my fruit flies, and I thought, nah, I'm not going to do this. And I crushed them with my hand. And that was the end of my medical career.
Sure.
That was it. Yeah.
And that though, in that situation, you then set your sights on probably most likely music, which ends up what you're doing. You go to France there to study with the legendary lady that you had studied with. how confident though, when you, in a sense, so after you say medical field is not for me, music what it is, because that takes a lot of guts to jump into that and then think that you're gonna make it, especially starting out fresh.
Well, I don't want to pretend that I'm some kind of a hero. I wasn't as confident as probably. I mean, I didn't think about it. I had the chance to study with Nadia Boulanger, and then while I was there, she said she took pity on me, and she was very complimentary, basically, and said, "Look, you have to learn a lot, but you've got great communication skills, and why don't you stay with me?" And my parents let me. It was during the Vietnam War. There were a lot of reasons not to stay in Paris, but I did. And but I never really was sure that I had the chops to either be a concert artist or to be a really good teacher, because I'm not a good teacher. I get very impatient when people don't learn it right away, So what saved me from having to make a decision was Eddie coming over, Rod came over, Doc came over. We had a nice little band. We played the Cannes Film Festival. We met Ringo and all these guys, and we thought, we're kind of doing okay. The bad news is that we recorded Dancing in the Moonlight, in a sense. And the good news, of course, is that it's wonderful and it was great for all of us, and we make money from it. The bad news was that we had high hopes at that moment that we really had a hit single. And the record company that was supposed to put it out in France had a reciprocal deal with Fantasy Records, which was Saul Zance's company that had Creedence, right? So it was assumed that they would put out Dancing in the Moonlight. Well, it turns out Saul didn't like the record, and he wouldn't put it out. And it was a combination of that. Plus, we did a showcase in London at I think at the Speakeasy, and our drummer at the time, unfortunately, very nice guy, but he couldn't take the pressure, and he got drunk. And we were bad, and we didn't get a deal, and it was just all the stuff started falling apart, and it fell apart, and that was kind of the end of that was the first end of King Harvest. We had a lot of ends, but that's one of the first ends.
You spoke in other interviews about how your band, while at Cornell, along with Eddie and Doc's band, were the two top groups at Cornell, and then you guys formed the group together, which is the rest is history, as they say. At what point did you see, after maybe seeing them perform Doc and Eddie's group, did you think, oh, that'd be cool if we formed a group together and we joined together? Or was that not on the peripheral?
We didn't do it that way. What happened was, I had when I went to school, I loved black music. I'm from Buffalo. I'm from near Buffalo, and there was a TV a radio station in Buffalo called WUFO, which was all R&B, and it was contemporary R&B at the time. Think about it, Sam and Dave, and et cetera. It was very Stax Volt oriented. It wasn't so Motown oriented. It was more R&B oriented, and I just loved that music. And it turned out there was a band at Cornell called the Ratchets, which had a singer who her name was Helen Jordan, and she was as good as any black singer in America at that moment. I would say today. She never was famous, it turned out, but anyway, I joined that band, and I loved that music, and we built that band, and we had three very talented African American young ladies who were singers, and then we brought a group from Buffalo down called the Del Royals, three guys who were just fantastic, and we had this like review. The other band, Doc and Eddie and those guys were kind of a bluesy band. They did more Stone stuff and stuff like that. So I never wanted to be like them. But then I went to Paris in 1967. When I came back, the big change when I came back was the big thing that had happened. First of all, my band had disbanded, and the people had gone off to various places. There was no way to turn that band back into a band. And I was only coming back to Cornell for one semester to get my degree in the fall of '68. But what happened was Sly and the Family Stone. That's what happened. And that, I think, changed all of our lives. I think Sly changed our lives. And I wanted to do that. And so we started a band together and did that. We had one of the singers from the Ratchets, a fantastic singer named Dee Dee Scott. That's not her name anymore. Her name is, she has an African name, but and Doc and Eddie, and it was just fun, man. We played fun music every night. It was fantastic. So that was when we decided to work together, because we all loved that music.
Sure. When you go over to France, how soon after you going over to France did the rest of the guys follow suit?
Well, I went over in the summer of '67 thinking I was going to stay for a month, and then I stayed for a year, came back, for that one semester. And then I left again in around April or so of 69. And then Rod came that summer. He was just going to tour around. I call him the village idiot, and he knows we joke. But I mean, he bought a motorcycle in England, and then it immediately broke down as soon as he got across the channel. He hit it in some farmer's field, and he came down to Paris to get it to rent a truck to go pick it up, and of course somebody had stolen it. So that was like, that's the character of what we were. Eddie was working in a bookstore in New York, and there were a lot. I think he was ready to move. There were drugs around or whatever, and he wasn't really playing much, and he wasn't enjoying the music stuff. And I convinced him that if he came over, he claims that I promised we had gigs, and I think he's probably right. Of course, I was lying. We didn't have any gigs, but I knew that we would get gigs because who could play better than us, right? So when he came over, we started a band, and then we had a couple of French people. We had a lot of fun. We played a lot of like small French festivals and clubs, and we had fun. We had motorcycles and dogs. And,
there you go.
Dope. Yeah, everything.
You've mentioned who you studied with over in France, one of the greatest teachers.
Teacher of composition
of the previous century. In terms of confidence of your own ability, future ability, how do you deal with that weight that her name brings in the society, but that you're learning from her at that time?
Well, I always thought I was just lucky to be there. I mean, most of the other people who were there studying with her were top students at big music schools around the world, not just Juilliard and etc., but from around the world. I was probably the least musically educated of any of her students, but she liked me, and she liked me, and she took pity on me, I think. And when I performed even little things here and there, she saw something in there that was admirable. So, but I never overestimated my worth or my chance. And then the other thing is that when I misspoke before. I said the thing that happened in 1968 was Sly, but also what happened was the band. Yeah. And it was really a combination of the band and Sly's music that Eddie and I love so much. And today, if I was in a room where there's a piano and Eddie walked in with a guitar, we would play together as if we had never stopped playing together. We just communicated really well. We just like brothers in music, and we both loved that music. And it was so every time we played, even these tiny little junky clubs in Paris, we had fun.
Yeah, sure. Eventually you make it back over to the United States, and the first version of King Harvest sort of sizzles out. And then you have shared the story before of when you heard Dancing the Moonlight on the radio, and you get back in contact with the guys and tell them, hey, let's try this again. Walk me through what was going on, with you when you were hearing that song, and what your emotions were like then.
Well, we'd broken up. Eddie and Doc were down in, Eddie and Doc kept playing as King Harvest in Paris with a couple of Australian guys and a bass player and a drummer. And then they were in Spain. They were on a boat. And I had gone to become a teacher of transcendental meditation. I was living in London, and then I decided I was invited to come and play at a symposium that was being given by Maharishi to talk about music and silence. And so I was out in California. I wasn't really thinking about the band so much, but then then I heard the song on the radio, and I called my mother up in upstate New York, and she said, "Oh yeah, Jack Robinson, your producer friend, has been trying to get in touch with you. Apparently you have a hit song." My parents were Austrian immigrants. Hit song didn't mean,
Sure.
I mean, the idea of it wasn't part of their lexicon.
Sure.
So she didn't go, "Hey, it's a hit." No. She just said, "Hey, somebody's trying to get in touch with you. You should call them." And then I went back to Paris, and Doc and I wrote that song. What was supposed to be the follow was called A Little Bit Like Magic, and then we decided to all move back to our little town upstate New York and form a band and go on tour. And we made a series of dumb decisions, but you make decisions whatever they are. But we laugh about it because Dancing in the Moonlight kept clinging to the top, near the top. It never became a #1 song, but it was #1 in a lot of markets, and it was always top 20 every place. And it took months and months and months and months because this little record company didn't have a real promotion staff. So they'd go one station by one station, Jeannie was her name, and she would call the program director and convince him to play the record. Sure. So at one point we weren't really obligated to stay with that record company. And there was a moment where Clive Davis approached us, and in fact we went down to the bottom line, and he was there. He didn't invite us, but we were sitting together because Orleans was just, Wells Kelly's band was there, and I say Wells Kelly's band, but I always thought of it as Wells Kelly's band. But anyway, and the offer, it was kind of, hey, you guys would be good on Columbia or whatever he said, Epic, CBS, I don't remember what. And Doc and I called our parents, and we decided that what we should do is be honorable and stay with this little record company. Really dumb decision. Yeah, I mean, we didn't know. Who knew? Sure. We didn't know. We had a manager who was also a very nice guy, but he didn't encourage us to do what we should have done. Sure. Yeah. So there you go.
But you look at it though, 50 years later, Dancing the Moonlight's still as big as ever, and it still brings a whole generation of fans, regardless of what happened back then. Around that time in the early 70s, 73, when I believe when Dancing the Moonlight comes out, maybe a year or two after that, you run into a man named Michael Edward Dr. Love himself.
Yeah.
Sort of walk me through that experience in terms of running into I mentioned a funny story that you had shared about your first conversation with him, but what was it like first running into a guy of that nature, machismo, very, confident in himself, and a guy who, was part of one of the greatest American groups at that point?
Yeah, but you know what? They weren't one of the greatest American
groups. Yeah.
In 1917, I had never been a Beach Boys fan. I always thought it was kind of, I didn't realize, I say uneducatedly, I was never a fan. I never really knew Brian's music and Mike's music and the rest of their music. I only knew fun till the day, that's dumb stuff, the kind of the fun stuff, but not very profound. Yeah. And so, to me, he was a TM teacher, and we should meet. That's fine. He has a couple of girlfriends, no problem. That's okay. I like girls too. We can figure this out. And he invited me to come out to California at some point. I don't remember exactly the timing, but at one point he invited me to come out to his place in Santa Barbara, and I flew out, and it was just to hang out. First, I went up to the other great artist that I should have added in with my huge opportunities in life was I became friendly with Charles Lloyd, who Charles today is even greater than ever as a player and as a creator and as a poet and he's being recognized as one of the maybe greatest ever jazz people in America right now, and I love him dearly. He's a great friend. And so I went up to Big Sur. I saw Charles, and I'm a little fuzzy here, but at some point he said he was going to be playing in New York, and I should come and sit in. Of course, I didn't. There was no way. I mean, I didn't know what kind of music. I thought he was kind of Kenny G. I didn't know that he was Charles Lloyd, and so thank God I didn't do that. But then I went down to Santa Barbara, saw Mike, and Mike wanted to have more TM guys in the band, and by the time I did the 74, King Harvest, we were playing clubs in upstate New York, but there was no real feeling that there was a future.
Sure.
And he invited me to come over. I went over to. I sailed my dad's boat over to Toronto from my hometown. The Beach Boys were playing at the Canadian National Exhibition, and he said, "Come over and meet the band." So I went over and met the band, and the first thing Carl said, may he rest in peace, and I know people love Carl, and we just never were close. Sure. I was Mike's friend, and that made it impossible to be his friend. But the first thing he said to me is, "You're not joining our band." Oh, wow. And I said, okay, well, I didn't have much investment in it. And then I didn't hear anything else from these guys. And I became a teacher of music at Maharishi University in the fall of 1974. I opened the music department with a couple other guys. And then Maharishi was going to go to Nepal in October of 74 to teach thousands of people TM. And I was invited to go with him.
Sure.
And I thought, what an opportunity. So I flew to Switzerland where he was as a staging to go to Nepal. And as soon as I got to Switzerland, I got a call from the Beach Boys road manager, Rick Nelson, saying, "Hey man, where are you? You're supposed to be in Caribou. We're rehearsing for the tour." And I said, "Well, what tour? I mean, I don't know no tour,
Sure.
So anyway, so then I went back to I did go to Caribou. They'd already finished rehearsing, but Carl was there, and he kind of begrudgingly took me through kind of what I would play on various songs, and that was how I joined the Beach Boys. I mean, it wasn't like there was no Big Bang Theory. It was
Sure.
like kind of a fizzle in theory.
Sure.
Yeah. And that was Mike's doing, and Mike
Sure.
insisted on it, and Mike and I became close friends, and we are close friends today. I really like him, and I respect him. We all have our foibles,
Sure.
but you know what? He's a very creative guy,
Sure.
and I felt that the Beach Boys would have been very different without him. Maybe they would have continued, maybe they wouldn't have.
Sure.
But his drive at continuing to keep that boat floating was pretty impressive.
Well, I'll say something briefly upon that, and I'll get back to the other questions I wanted to mention about that. The guys who are in their group today, some of them I've tried to get on my podcast here, but they're touring almost 300 dates a year, so it's near impossible to get them, because then once they finish one leg, then Mike gets them a bunch of new dates, so they're continuously doing it. So then you say, oh, it's end of October, they're finishing soon, but then they have the 2023 dates coming up soon, so there's no break in. God bless Mike at 81 to still be rocking and rolling as much as he can. And at that point, Endless Summer is an album that comes out around the time that you join the group. On top of that, but then also they have the Beachago Tour, which you were part of. Describe that aspect, joining the Beach Boys at that point.
Well, the year before I joined, they were still in station wagons. I mean, and then when, by the time I joined, after the Endless Summer thing came out, I mean, we had generally there was a plane for the smokers and a plane for the non-smokers, and Mike didn't necessarily want to fly with, I hate to say this, but with one of the brothers who's no longer around. But I mean, they had different lifestyles. Sure. So why put them together and make themselves uncomfortable? Sure. And they had the money, so they just had different travel,
Sure.
So I mean, to me, I certainly was no rock star, but we were living like rock stars. I wasn't being paid like a rock star, but we were living like it. Sure. Somebody picks up your bag and puts it on something, and I mean, didn't have to carry my own equipment. That was a first. Didn't have to plug in my own piano. Yeah. And then the Chicago thing was fantastic, because what happened was the Beach Boys were going to use the Chicago horns on the Beach Boys set. Now, and they asked me if I would just kind of write out the parts. Well, the horn parts for many of the Beach Boys songs are very rudimentary. I mean, there's nothing fancy, right?
Sure.
So I went out to Jimmy Panko's house one day out in Malibu, and Walter and Lee and Jimmy were there, and I brought my parts for them, and they're just laughing at me, and I said, hey, listen, I'm not a bad horn player. Oh yeah. So in the end, I ended up playing trombone in Chicago on that tour. They did a fourth part on many, like Feeling Stronger, a lot of, not the whole tour, not the whole set, but a lot of their set. And it was just a thrill for me. Sure. I was a pretty good trombone player in high school, and I still had the chops then. And nobody was embarrassed by my playing. I mean, it was fun. So that was like a real high point to me, that tour.
Eventually, as I keep mentioning, your work with the Beach Boys includes MIU, then Mike's group Celebration. Could you forecast any of that happening before that happened with the Beach Boys?
Well, right from the beginning, Mike said, we're going to do stuff together that won't be Beach Boys. Because and there was always competition, whose songs are going to be on the album, and there were very, very different styles. And so he just wanted to have his own kind of, so it turned out that I had I called him a cousin. He wasn't a cousin, but we were very close. An English lawyer who had come to America. His father was a big film producer, and he was an expert at raising tax shelter money. And so I introduced him to Mike, and we all hung out and blah, blah, blah. And in the end, we decided to start a record company. And the first piece of it was going to be that summer of 1976. Al and I wrote Lady Linda.
Sure.
We recorded it at Brother Records. And at that time, we felt that was a really good pop song.
Sure.
And we were going to basically form a band. You know, it was eventually became Celebration, but originally we called it Waves. And Mike, it turns out that the name wasn't available, but Mike was sure we should call it Waves. And his reasoning was that we would go on tour with Wings, and it would be Wings and Waves. You know, anyway, literally, that's how Mike thinks, right? So, and it's, you know, not so stupid. But anyway, so it didn't work out. So we formed Celebration, but Al Jardine, Charles Lloyd, Mike, and I formed a company called Love Songs. And we were going to just record and have fun and change the world through meditation. And then we raised a whole bunch of money, and we recorded other people as well. It wasn't successful, I have to say, but we just had a great time.
Sure.
We had a great time. There's a Celebration record that we put out on Pacific Arts, Michael Nesmith's label. I don't know if you've ever heard that record, but
no.
There's some good tunes on it. There's a bunch of my tunes and a bunch of Mike's tunes, and Charles. And it's not a well-produced record. I produced it. It's not that great. It just isn't. You know, I didn't have those kind of chops. But the songs are real pop songs. I mean, you should take a listen.
Yeah, I'll check it. Yeah, after this, I'll check it out. After that, you're working with Mike and obviously Al closely on top of Lady Linda. Then MIU starts coming around. Your process and the intro into writing with Mike compared to writing with Al.
Well, that's different. That's interesting. Well, with Al, I only wrote one song,
Sure.
although we keep threatening that we're going to write other songs. But I was up at his place up in a Big Sur, and he had what's called now the Red Barn, but he was just starting it, you know. And I sat down and I started playing, you know, kind of, and then I had this idea of using the Bach chorale, and then he started singing. It was just spontaneous.
Sure.
And then, you know, I don't know if you've ever seen the video of the original video of Lady Linda. It's you know, we had a lot of fun. I mean, we had a lot of fun, and we did a tour basically to kind of help promote TM.
Sure.
We did a tour with Doug Henning and Andy Kaufman and us.
Wow.
Yeah. It was whacked, completely whacked. Yeah. But it was in 1977, the fall, I think. And Mike's different. Mike would listen to, either Mike would have a melody in his mind or part of one, or he would listen to one of my melodies and just write words to it.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was easy.
Sure.
Yeah. We had a song that came out about a year and a half ago called Alone on Christmas Day.
Sure. Yeah. I read about that.
That we wrote back in 1975 or something like that.
Sure.
You know?
Wow. Imagine that. Yeah. All these years later, so it comes back out. I had Gary Griffin on a while ago, and he talked about his experiences at the MIU school, the MIU school, and how everyone shifted over there to where they recorded the MIU album, which, you know, makes sense if it's at the campus. What was that like? I believe he said you guys lived on the campus and then you guys built the studio there. What was that like for you?
Well, you know, I was fully involved in transcendental meditation. I was a teacher. I'd been away for 6 months doing kind of advanced stuff, Mike and I. And so we were, like I said, we were saving the world by creating good vibrations, basically. So we paid for and built, there was a building, so we built kind of rooms that we could stay in with little suites, like, and then we built a studio. And you know, it wasn't a bad time. We toured out of there. I think we flew out of Ottumwa, which is about 20 miles away or something like that. And we'd go off to do tours, and we'd come back there to finish the records. We did the MIU album. We did an album with Charles Lloyd there. We did a bunch of stuff.
Sure. You mentioned another accomplishment in your life, or a high point in your life, besides the Chicago stuff, was playing at Wembley in the mid-70s.
Well, you know, I was just a sideman, you know, but still, it was Wembley Stadium.
Sure.
It was an Elton John concert. you know, well, that was a lot of people. It was 100,000 people. It was before, I think, you know, we played other big shows with the Beach Boys in the US after that, but that summer was kind of like it was big. And I might be remembering this incorrectly, but I'm pretty sure that opening act before the Beach Boys was the Eagles.
Wow.
I think you have to look. And the only reason I remember that is because I remember standing at the side of the stage with Jimmy Guercio, and these guys had really beautiful girlfriends. And we thought, okay, they're rock stars, man. These guys got these guys are, not only are they good musicians, but they got the girls. They're definitely rock stars.
Yeah, that's a moment where, you know, you have, as you said, you have 100,000 people that are all cheering for you guys, going crazy. As a musician, someone who might not be used to the 100,000 crowd when they're performing outside of that group, how did you adjust and make sure that you're playing the right notes? Because if you're not, you know, you're not going to do too well.
Well, I mean, there was the playing the music of the Beach was what I was supposed to be playing was not challenging.
Okay.
It was not challenging.
And
by the way, yeah, I mean, it was not challenging. I mean, it was, you know, it was great to see. It's great to be on a stage, even though it's not my music. It's great to be on a stage to hear, you know, tens of thousands of people singing along with a song. I mean, the energy is amazing.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure it's something where it and for some people it may be hard for them to sort of accept it if that's over, or sort of leave that if they can't be around that anymore. I want to flash forward years later. You, as you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, 10 years ago, you reunite with King Harvest to play in your home state of New York in Olcott Beach. What was that like for you in terms of reconnecting and going back in time with those guys?
Well, no, it was great. I mean, you know, what happened was the fall before that, I think, we were asked to play on one of TJ Lebetsky's, you know, PBS kind of fundraiser things. And we went and played Dancing in the Moonlight, and we hadn't seen each other for a long while. And it was as if we never stopped touring together. I mean, it sounded great. We had a good time.
Sure.
And so we decided to do this. My friends in the town decided to put the town together and have us do it. That was around the 4th of July, and it turned out actually that the 3rd of July, Huey Lewis was playing at a place called Art Park in Lewiston, New York, which is I think it's a 7,000 seater. It's an outdoor shed, a really nice spot.
Right.
And so I called Huey and I said, look, you know, we're going to be up there, and Doc's not doing that great, and it would be really good for his spirit. And I didn't have to finish the sentence, and Huey said, yeah, of course, come on, we'll do it. So we went up, Doc and I went up there. The other guys weren't in Olcott yet. Doc and I went up and we did the sound check, and we played, and it was that's also on the, you know, you can get it on YouTube, but it was a lot of fun. And that was kind of the high point. The actual reunion was sad a little bit because this is a guy who was a natural rock star, Doc. He sang beautifully. He was a good musician too. He never sang out of tune ever. And when we did this reunion, he was singing, he was behind, he couldn't remember the words. He was singing a little bit out of tune here and there. And it was just like, it was sad. And then he died. So that was really sad.
Sure. Since that reunion, and besides the fact that you've been sort of putting on these recitals since the early 80s, you've recorded music with the remaining living members of King Harvest, Eddie and Rod, not Rod, but also Michael Andres, as I mentioned before we got going here. Although it's been a few years since you recorded new material with them, what is it like recording with those guys years after King Harvest?
Well, we recorded, Eddie and Rod and I recorded a song about, I don't know, 2 years ago, it must have been before. It was before COVID, so probably 4 years ago. It was called Our Old Songs. Look it up. Yeah. And we loved it. We had a great time. We did it in a little tiny studio, and it was just the three of us. Rod did the horns, and it's not a great song, but it was a fun song to write and a song to record, and we had fun listening to it afterward. You know, so we'd probably do it again sometime, but we're getting a little older now. You know?
Well, hey, as long as you still have some love for music and passion for it, no one's stopping you. Before we end here today, and again, I want to thank you a great deal, Ron, for doing this. I appreciate it. I want to end on a little game called the One Word Challenge. So in this game, what I'll do is throw out a few names of people, places, or things that have some connection to my guest. And my guest, what to do is best to say a word or two or sentence, whatever it feels like. What best comes to mind when he hears the phrase. So are you ready?
Sure.
First one, Newfane, New York.
My home.
Olcott Beach.
My true home.
Mike Love.
A great friend and a talented friend.
Al Jardine.
Also a very good friend and he's a character.
Success.
Success is fleeting.
Music.
And it's essential to life.
And last but certainly never least in this cosmic universe we all live in called Earth, Ron Altbach.
Well, a developing case, I would say.
Well, sir, I want to say again, thank you for taking the time with me to share your stories of King Harvest, your time with the Beach Boys, my favorite group, and so many other tales from your life. It was a great treat for me.
It was fun for me too.
Thank you. Well,
thank you for inviting me.
All those out there who enjoyed it, because who the heck wouldn't? Down the line, when my guest this week wins a Grammy Award for his next piece of classical music at a performance, a live album, you're like, holy crap, I should subscribe. So comment, subscribe, like, share, all that fun jazz. Follow on Twitter, Nolan Court Night, and Instagram, Nolan Court Night Show. Ron, you kind of mentioned it when you get back out on the road eventually, but is there anything else you'd like to sort of share with people that they should look out for, anything of that nature?
No, I would say that, if you on YouTube, there's quite a number of pieces me playing classical music. I'm proud of everything that's on there. So if people want to know what it is, just take a look.
Sure. There's this. I recommend checking out some of the concerts from the concert from the reunion tour. There's an interview that King Harvest, or the members at the time King Harvest, did to promote the concert, which was very well performed, and the interview was intriguing. So check it out. And in the words of Johnny Carson, the dean of talk shows like this, or though mine's not like his, point being, in the words of Johnny Carson, I bid you a heartfelt good night. Till next time, take care.